Hooked up.
Yeah, we got it working, and we're gonna
Well,
record.
I
We'll
was streaming on
record and we'll
YouTube.
cut it out. Yeah, I got it working perfectly. So I got it through like the live. It's recording. It's streaming on YouTube right now.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, okay. I get the
I just don't
view.
like how they do that. They make us jump through like, yeah, this is live, and I'm looking at it, and
And we'll
we
cut it
are
out.
live. Yeah, I got it working perfectly. Perfect. So it's streaming on YouTube right
Oh,
now.
snap. It's really going.
I know, right? We're not as lame as we thought. We have some image. Here's we got a slideshow that we've kind of thrown together in a hurry. So bear with us.
Do it up.
Where is it at? Format, tools. I don't usually use Google Slides. Slideshow. I'm
Oh,
gonna share my screen, all right?
yeah.
Share screen. Hey. Y'all see it?
Oh,
Oh, yeah. Episode
Cool.
5.
Episode 5. All right. We should probably all introduce ourselves. Welcome to Navigating the East. I'm Cody or Cassandra. I know, either one. You choose, whatever. But a little background about me since we have new guests here. Graduate from University of New Mexico. Done a lot of work in international relations, a lot of like housing work. Actually, me and tonight's guest have done some work on the global house. What was it? Basic Needs Project.
Yep.
Yeah, that's how we met. I believe so. Was it something like that? But somewhere along ties with UNM. But I work in that here at San Diego State currently teaching, and I get ready to transfer to the University of Hawaii. All right, and our
Congrats.
co-host Ethan.
hello. Yep. My my expertise, as I said before, is journalism and media production, and I'm excited to get to learn more about as we delve into housing within China.
Awesome. Tonight's guest is Tony Wallace. I'll let him introduce himself. Wonderful,
Hey,
wonderful
nice.
guys. I'm very excited about this one.
Oh, thanks. Me too. Yeah. Great to catch up with you, and nice to meet you, Ethan. Yeah, my name's Tony Wallace. I'm in the graduate program in communication and journalism at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque. Right now, my focus and my concentration for my master's program is health communications, um, creating a culture, and uh, that's really hard to do. But also signifying a connection between someone's housing status as the main predictor of their health, regardless of the community. So, as just a global standard that however you're living is probably the best indicator of how your health is going. So that's me. For the last 4 years, I've been heavily involved in housing justice locally in Albuquerque. That's where we met. I was at the Honors College at UNM under Dr. Sarita Kargas. They were doing the Basic Need Project over there. You can check it out at basicneeds.unm.edu. But their findings were um, pretty horrific. And we were on the front lines of that. And yeah, we have a lot of stories. So
Yeah,
we'll get into that later for sure. I'm excited to see. I'm excited to see your presentation.
awesome. So, this episode's on housing in China. We thought this was a lot different than what you really see in the West. Something that's interesting an overview in China has to do with the experience rapid urbanization over the few decades. You've kind of seen this, you kind of see it everywhere. Oh, let me go back. Hold on. Too many buttons here. Sorry about that. All right. Trying to fix Zoom and it went weird. Anyways, China experienced rapid urbanization over the few decades with millions of people migrating from rural to cities. You see this in a lot of places, better economic opportunities, urbanization's driven demand for housing. You see that in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou a lot. Something you kind of similar we see is like housing dynamics. We've seen price increases in urban areas. We've seen this in the US and other parts of the world as well. Government policies have regulations, price control. Yeah, and promoting affordable housing, types of housing, just like the US and the West, they got different kinds of housing, apartments, condominiums, and then what you see is traditional courtyard houses. Shitty one. And then you have high-rise apartments that are prevalent. Something that's interesting is government initiative. The Chinese government actively intervenes in the housing market through policy, through controlling prices, regulating estate development, promoting home ownership, which is contrast to the West. When you say so, Tony? Oh, you're mute.
Oh,
You're mute.
Yeah, I'm taking notes here. I'm learning a lot. Sorry, I'm like really into this.
Sweet. That's different. They have measures such as purchase restrictions, mortgage regulation, taxation on property transactions, management market can, they're implemented to manage market fluctuations and curb speculation. They have affordable housing initiatives in China. They address affordable housing issues. The government's launched various affordable housing programs, including subsidized housing, public rental house, and low-cost housing. They're basically their initiatives to provide affordable housing for low middle income families, particularly in urban areas where housing costs are high. I got some stories about that one. Despite the government's effort, there are challenges that persist. You have affordability issues, unequal access, property market speculation, and then you have concerns about housing quality and safety. They used to have ghost cities. You'll see those. They're urban developments with high vacancy rates, highlight imbalances in housing markets, and raise questions of sustainability. Future trends you can see expected to evolve, response to demographic change policies. Future trends may include increased focus on sustainable urban development, the expansion of rental housing options, and efforts to address disparities in housing access and affordable access in our different regions. Each region in China is vastly different. There has been successes though, even with rapid urbanization. Here's some key successes. Even with massive urbanization, they've been able to do unprecedented pace, hundreds of millions of people from rural to cities for better economic opportunities. That's why you see how China have these mass structures. Fortunately, sometimes you end up with ghost structures, but there are success stories, the accommodations. The government has implemented affordable housing programs. So you have low and income homes, subsidized housing, public rental house, affordable projects. And they're basically just providing decent affordable homes those in need. Infrastructure development. China's invest heavily in infrastructure development, urban areas, roads, public transportation, utilities, other amenities. When I was in Shanghai, they have some of the best public transportation I've seen in a long time, besides maybe Japan. But they even know that's up to debate. They're pretty neck and neck. Economic growth. China has the booming housing markets contribute significantly to China's economic growth. People need jobs or move into city areas. You need more housing. Property values go up. So does consumer spending and wealth. And innovative urban planning. China's undertaking ambitious urban plans. You'll see eco cities and smart cities. You'll have international cooperation on housing. You'll have where, countries collab with international organizations, IGOs, research institutions, and foreign governments to exchange knowledge and practices in affordable housing. What was that? Ethan?
sorry about that.
Well, there's been struggles too. We all know there's been struggles. They face several different housing sectors, achievements, just some key struggles. One, China's housing markets were $60 trillion, but it's been a decline since 2021. Post-COVID has really hurt them, especially where property owners are not producing payment on regular basis. That's a problem. Housing affordability with the urbanization, like soaring housing prices, especially in cities like Shanghai. I have friends who really do struggle to find housing in cities like that. Speculation investment, rural real estate speculation's been a big driver in housing costs. It's volatile. Sometimes it poses a risk to the bubble, which there is equality and accessibility issues where you see where urban and rural areas as well as income groups. Many migrant workers and low-income families struggle to find affordable and adequate housing. Housing quality and safety, this is an issue. With rapid construction, it becomes a quality and safety issue. You know, you don't usually get the best quality when you build a house in a month. Empty homes, there are ghost cities where you have these high vacancy cities where they're trying to build and move people from rural communities. There's a debt risk. We all know how that is. Financial stability driven by mortgages. Environmental impact of rapid urbanization, pollution, habitat destruction, energy consumption. So they do need sustainable urban planning. But my favorite thing, in which I'm really interested in, is there is alternative futures. You can do this where China's housing market and the challenges it faced. There's some futures you could have, alternative futures. One, China should invest in sustainable development, focus on compact, mixed-use commodities, green buildings, efficient public transportation systems, which they have in a lot of cities, but not all over China yet. You need to build livable communities and resilient cities. Affordable housing expansion, continue down that road of low-cost housing. Regulatory reform, China could enact competent regulatory reforms to stabilize the housing market, curb speculation, and prevent a housing bust. Make the bubble last and make it a long-term stability. Rural revitalization, China could adapt strategies to revitalize rural areas, promote balanced regional development. Instead of having everyone in urban areas, you could diversify the economy and invest in rural communities as well. Have inclusive housing policies. That's the big one. Technology innovation, smart cities. You can create smart and efficient cities with advanced infrastructure and services. And you can have internal collaboration and knowledge exchange. Diversify the economy and invest in rural. So that's kind of where I was at. I think my building lost power, guys.
My building lost power.
I don't know. That was okay. It's back. All right, we're back. Speaking of building houses really quickly. So that's pretty much what I have for PowerPoint. I would like to lead a discussion on these things. And that's kind of where we'll focus the podcast. And that's where I'm kind of happy to talk about focusing the podcast.
Okay.
So ultimately, I would like to have a discussion on housing and as how we can compare China to like the United States and how they do things in the West. That would be interesting and exciting to see how that would fold out. What was something that really caught your eye, Ethan?
Well, I was actually kind of curious about when you were talking about like the building, like are they doing over construction to the point where that's just there's more buildings than there are people that actually fill them, or their idea is to build like the perfect city, and yet by trying to build a perfect city, they're not taking into account the affordability of these homes and being able to actually support their citizens.
Yeah, that and it seems like when they're trying to build rapid urbanization to move people from rural communities, because you got to think in like China, if you look at Western China, it's a lot different than like Eastern China, right? Western China's you got the Tibetan Plateau, you got deserts, you got pretty extreme terrain. So like people are trying to move from these places to like where you can get help. Like for like, if something happens and you're stuck in the middle of the desert, it's a lot harder for the government to come rescue you than it would be if you're in, because China's a huge country. China's huge, and with it, so like it's something that they've been trying to do for years. But when you build rapidly like that, it's hard to get people to want to leave everything behind to just go to some city. So there's some different thoughts on it. What do you think, Tony? Like,
Well, there's a lot to consider, so thank you for that presentation. I learned quite a bit. I took a bunch of notes because there's a lot of correlations between what's going on in China and what's happening pretty much in every sovereign state,
yes.
in terms of the housing crisis being a global crisis, right? A lot of these problems that they're having, like the bad construction and the difficulty relocating folks and the hyper rapid density, these are problems everywhere worth living, whether it's San Diego or Albuquerque, it doesn't matter. Um, the the thing that stands out to me the most is that there's always this distinction made between the American economy and the Chinese economy, right? And maybe you can speak more to the differences in terms of the housing economy between these two places, but they share the same problems despite those differences.
Yeah. And Chinese in the US and Chinese, how the economies aren't all that different.
Mhm.
How they do things. They're not all that different. The only difference is really it's one is more government ran. But even then corporations still have a very large say in China. I would say safety standards are also less in China than they are in the US.
They try to build everything up so fast. Basically trying to factory work, right?
Yeah, I mean, I watched them build a terminal in Shanghai in 2 years. Pretty impressive, not gonna lie.
Mm.
So there are benefits to getting a lot done, and the building is secure. So it's impossible to be like just because it's built fast means it's bad. There are situations where you can build critical and major income structures quick, and they can be done right. But there are situations where you do the opposite. You rapid. So, when you have rapid urbanization, sometimes you have corruption. You got people who are just doing it quickly. They're hiring nepotism. There's a lot of different factors when it comes to that. Or they're just trying to get the government, what's it called? They're trying to get a government contract done.
And,
So it's really hard
and
to tell like what's actually without having a massive study, which I'm not an expert on that part. I would like to read literature on that. I might look into that.
I got you.
Cool.
So I've studied the problems in the US, right? And their problems shared with China. So I can't speak to the solutions for China, especially because in terms of agriculture and bioengineering, they're like 100 years ahead of the United States.
Holy-
So really, like the United States has a really hard time pulling people in and out of cities, in and out of rural areas. And they don't have as much job creation as China does, as far as I know. So cultural differences, though, like you were speaking to, where in America your housing is connected to your income level. If you make a lot of money, you have a nice big house. If you don't make a lot of money, you have a shitty house. But I don't see how that's different in China because, like, if you look up Hong Kong cage homes, that is a classic study in rapid urbanization having horrific outcomes to health.
Yeah.
They're basically like dog kennels for rent, you know. And
So,
America's not that far off from being there, honestly.
so I forgot to record.
it's I noticed in but when I noticed it was too late for me to say anything.
You
But
should have
it's
said something. Now we gotta. Now
no,
we get.
yep, no. But we're okay. We're live on YouTube.
Yeah, it's true. It will send us a copy, right?
We can download it. We can download
Okay.
it.
All
We
right.
have
You just have to
we have
can you rip the audio from it?
I can rip the audio. I
No,
always
maybe we should just start over the way it sounds. Okay.
No, no, Ethan's got this, man. Yeah, Ethan with the clutch save. Damn.
Yeah. That's
Can we
So
true.
have
I have a couple questions though.
Sure.
If is your presentation finished?
We kind of just threw it together based on basic info we knew. So
Okay,
we're
because if we
working
want to
on
like,
more.
if we want to pick a rabbit hole to go down, is that what we were talking about?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I would love to explore the difference between a specific instance in America, like a specific problem related to tax.
Hmm.
Because in China, they don't have a tax related to housing, right?
I believe so. I'd have to be interested to look.
Oh, okay.
I believe I would be interested to see like what would be the difference on that.
So you were talking about like different studies, different
Tax.
research. Found a really interesting study by someone named Bernadette Atwahene,
Hmm.
Atuahene. She's famous for this Detroit study she did from 2009 to 2015.
Name sounds
I like to call it Detroit's tax apocalypse. And you're from there, so I figure you could speak
yeah.
on this a little too.
What was her name? Atra. How do you spell her last name?
Atuahene.
Mm-hmm. I found her. You know
Bernadette
what?
Atwahene.
She looks so familiar.
Yeah, so here's what she found out. She found out that 100,000 homes, and these were low income, typically black family occupied, right? 100,000 homes in Detroit were artificially had their value increased by the city to make the taxes unaffordable, which resulted in a wave of evictions and homelessness from 2009 to 2015. The government like colluded with themselves to steal these homes out from under people, and they sold them at auction online to developers. I bet you remember this, Cassandra. Like,
Yeah. I mean, Ethan's from Detroit too.
oh dang, I didn't know that. That's wild.
Me and Ethan went to the same college in
yeah.
Detroit. So
They're all
Ethan lives in
info.
Dearborn right there. So
Yeah, so like well like one of the things you touched on in China was like corruption or
hmm
nepotism or like undermining the system. And like what the hell are we supposed to do about that? You
right.
know?
That's true. What do we do? I think maybe more government regulations on control, and maybe more audits, but how are you going to stop the family member from getting the lowest bid possible? But it's really not the lowest bid possible. So I mean, maybe audit, but then at what point you have to think like, how do we stop elected officials from corruption or just, especially in housing? They build all these buildings and then their cousins getting a kickback. Look at Kwame Kilpatrick. That's one example, Ethan.
Yeah. I remember I even wrote a paper on him back when I was in middle school.
Yeah.
Well, I honestly looking at how in, how strong corruption is when it comes to you know these big figures. It's hard to figure out how you can actually just you know put a stop to it. How to actually make a change and make it better for the average citizen.
Another thing
Yeah.
too. Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Another thing too is that even though they get caught and go to jail, the damage is already done to the communities for decades.
Yeah,
I mean, look what Kwame Kilpatrick did to Detroit. The damage was felt for a very long time.
yeah, just and they're trying. I can see people now are trying to like bring life back to Detroit, try to revitalize its soul. But
Right.
yeah, there's a good there's a good chance that everybody's gonna have that one image.
Yeah, of course.
And it's not right.
I mean, he stole billions of millions of dollars too, and you know
Yeah, which
that
could
hurts
have
the
been
city.
used for. Yeah, should have been used for the people.
I mean, yeah,
Right. So,
exactly.
right. So you were talking about in your presentation, you were talking about intentional design, like the city of the future, right?
Oh,
Well, there's these two opposing forces that make this impossible from like just I've only done 4 years of study on this in school and doing work in the community, so I can only speak to like my personal experience and perspective, right? But as like someone who's like consolidated this information and tried to apply it in like fixing the housing crisis that's local to me, one of the things I realized is that there is no this government corruption is really difficult to combat. It's also impossible to assuage. Like there's no convincing them to not be greedy. Like there's no convincing them that a surplus of income for them is less important than the lives of their people in the community for decades going forward. It's really hard to like deal with the fact that these people like maintain their position um to profit financially versus investing in community, right? Because like community can't so capital is basically like money that generates more money, right? So like capital is an investment that generates profit for the capital holders. If people who are in charge or people with the power to make these like really big decisions that affect a lot of people, if they're not connected to the people, they're not going to make decisions that benefit the people. Is the culture different in China? Because there's still corruption happening, but like, do you feel the politicians or the decision makers are more connected to their communities?
I think so. I think the government's done a pretty good job of like anti-corruption campaigns because they've done several high-profile anti-corruption campaigns where they're getting rid of corrupt officials. I've noticed like regulatory reforms I've seen they'll streamline approval process, improve oversight of real estate transactions so the government kind of steps into a little bit. And you'll see something with like land reform I've seen over the years where they standardize land auctions instead of just backdoor deals. You'll see where like public awareness, where they're teaching like netizens and citizens to be aware of corruption. So they've incentivized the public for saying something. And I think they've done some also, if I believe it, they've done some legal reform. They've set some framework for anti-corruption legislation, but again, I think the most important one here is probably going to be anti-corruption campaigns and public awareness because without an aware public that are having like anti-corruption the campaigns, I mean, that's the only way you're going to get someone to stop is through a community. You won't get it through laws and rules. Like they're just going to do it anyway.
well,
We've seen that
it's.
happen with Kwame Kilpatrick in Detroit. Like he didn't really care that it was against the law.
I
We've seen
feel
it in
like it's kind of
Albuquerque
weird.
too.
I feel like it's kind of weird to think that. I mean, it's good, but I think it's weird that people all agree to work towards an anti-corruption campaign because maybe this just comes from what I see, like from where I'm at. I feel like people kind of live off of corruption to actually stay in power. But having someone actually go into more of a selfless way of managing to like anti-corruption to try to make things better for everybody, that almost sounds like too good to be true, but there's evidence of them actually doing it, you're saying.
One thing I think with China is that, and I think the CPC, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, CCDI, they'll actually investigate and discipline party members that are corrupt. Like where our government really doesn't really do a lot. Sometimes you got like some people, but they don't really investigate like they should. But you have
Yeah.
China who does this regularly, and they don't want state. They also will do targeted inspections in state-owned enterprises. They'll uncover corrupt practices. They'll have drills where they go in and try to make sure if someone's corrupt or not. Where we don't really do that. We just kind of wait to see it on paper, but then it's too late. Paper,
Yes.
and if you're looking at government officials, that paper can just be altered, you know, how you want it to be. So I think China does a better job at, going in. I also think that like President Xi Jinping has done a well with like anti-corruption efforts. He really made an emphasis that it's going to be party discipline and party will and leadership. They want to they want to combat corruption to maintain social stability in government and public trust. Where in China, like it's really important to have social stability and public trust. Like that's really important in China and Asia in general, where you really don't see that in the West.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, oh, sorry, Ethan. Were you gonna say something?
Oh no, I'm good.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, so we have to, like you're saying, we have to account for cultural subjectivities, right? Like people are shaped by the places they live, people are shaped by their communities. So there's such a difference in culture. I mean, honestly, like I feel like all humans are 99% the same. Seriously. It's just that 1% where there's like a cultural disconnect or language barrier or whatever, where, the differences are so glaring that they feel like there's a lot of them, but there's really not. We have more in common than we have apart, right? But the thing is that like those anti-corruption campaigns, they don't get people off the street. You know what I mean? They don't get people into nicer, safer homes. They don't make rent cheaper. Like it's basically the government saying we're policing ourselves. It's like, well, you kind of damaged our trust. So, but I guess like cultural subjectivity of the people in China is that like trust can be repaired.
Mm.
In America, I feel like most people are so disenfranchised with the government. There is no repairing that relationship if there ever even was one. And that applies to housing too. Like we saw basically the monopoly board during COVID, like during lockdown. Like we saw like the operating system of the housing economy and housing culture is dictated by profit essentially, and not about community safety or public health. Like it could be, you know. I don't know how China would approach that. I have no idea how America would approach it because our healthcare system's pretty terrible.
Hmm.
So one thing I think China has done well in terms of helping with housing and just poverty in general is China has extremely eliminated extreme poverty. Like 100% eliminate extreme poverty. Like in China. Like this has been first of its kind. And it's defined as China in the world. Extreme poverty defined is basically everyone living under $1.90 per day, which was like it's just what the World Bank defines as extreme poverty. So that's something that's
Can
really
we pause on that?
good.
Why is the World Bank defining extreme poverty?
They usually give a dollar amount because they're the ones that have the dollar amount, right? So they're setting it based on what. So they'll do it per country, not just globally, right? So it's like China's minimum, and then it'll be different for like the US. It'll be different based on like living standard. So what they're saying is that people who are making because less than $1.90 USD, right? USD. So in China, you're getting paid in yuan. So you're not really getting the same. So basically, that's how that is. So they're just telling us like a global standard. That way they have a place to measure data from.
And I appreciate you explaining that. That really ties into this. I don't even want to call it a conspiracy theory at all. Um, there's a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that the system that created the housing crisis, the global system that created the housing crisis, can't solve it because it's part of the system, the way it operates. And the operating system is coded, if you will, by international banks.
Yeah.
The foreign exchange market literally defines poverty.
Yeah. I kind of
This
like what
same, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I said. I kind of like what I think the World Bank isn't bad. I think because they're the ones that provide loans to like low income governments and stuff. So like they're not as bad as like I don't know Bank of America, like something like that. So like they're pretty good when it comes to they're more of like a government loan system instead of like a personal. So I take their word a little better than like I don't know, like I said, Bank of America or like anything like that. So I would say they're more of like I would keep call them like an NGO.
Wow, okay. Yeah. I'm learning a lot. Um,
I don't know if I wouldn't call it an NGO actually. I would call it like an IFI, International Financial Institute. NGO is misspoke. I wouldn't call it an NGO,
hmm,
but still, but they're operated from the United Nations, so indirectly, it's not. I guess it's an IFI that's kind of like ran by an IGO. So it's kind of ran by an international government organization, which would be the UN. So I
hmm.
guess it's the UN definition, basically, of what it would be, which I feel like not many people really know a lot about, like international politic organizations, IGOs, and different things. I think we did a video on that.
Yeah, actually you did one on the UN, right? The
Yeah,
last,
yeah,
yeah. So that's it's funny you mentioned that. That's really my, in terms of world economics and economics in general, really my focus of study has been related to like real estate investment, right?
nice.
And that's really the bottom line, is like why there's a global housing crisis is because the real estate economy is built to self-destruct. That's the bottom. Like that's not a conspiracy theory. It just, our planet is finite in space, and we will eventually run out of scale in on all three axes. Like it cannot.
Yeah,
Like we have to go to space to keep this thing going. You know what I
right.
mean?
Or
So
That's
start building
true.
up, build condos, and it's about I'm
right,
gonna rent in
yeah,
Hawaii. It's about to
Some
buy
people,
about to rent a condo.
some people are looking to Mars.
Hey,
yeah,
you never
right.
know.
Condos on Mars, yeah,
Here we
and
go. Brought to you by
and,
Hilton.
that's what I'm talking about. That's really what I'm talking about. It's that it's so fascinating is that like we have so many people, so many living people with enough in their personal bank account to be Batman. And none of them choose to be Batman, you know. None of them choose to, none of them choose to fix the housing crisis. You know what I mean? It's like, and it is doable, really, but it has to happen outside of the housing system, economy and market. It's really weird. Um, but it is this like really fascinating thing. My main focus of study with the UN is indigenous people's rights in
Cool.
international law, and how the problem with the progress and the problem of like violent colonialization continuing to this day, um, you know, people like rainforest activists being machine gunned in Brazil and Peru, that sort of thing, right?
Mhm.
The UN says don't do that, and those governments can say, okay, we're going to police ourselves, but those people are already dead. There's no bringing them back. And this logic also applies to the housing crisis. It's like, okay, you can say you're going to do something, you can say you're going to chill with the corruption and all that, but that doesn't get the people off the street. I'm so curious how China eliminated poverty. Like, how the hell did they do that?
I think a lot of reform, and a lot of building. and a lot of just moving people to urban areas. That makes a big difference too. A lot of, I mean, look at their economy. It's been booming. Their economy, look at from what they went from, in the late 70s when they started opening up, they went from a closed, straight, pure Soviet style economy to, well, now we're going to build economics. We're going to have brand new, we're going to, you got to think of the 70s. They started opening up. They lifted people out of poverty. They went from, they started making, and then they had poverty alleviation programs where they had, you know, in situations like I want to remember it's called, it was like 10,000 Village program. Is something to look up. It basically provided financial support and technical assistance to poor villages, and they've been doing a lot of like 5-year plan for poverty alleviation. I remember that one right off the top of my head that they've been doing. So they've had a lot of government intervention. They've had a lot of like infrastructure development. They've had leadership on this. They've had environmental protection. So they've been, reducing pollution. People say pollution's bad in China. Sure, but China's also reduced it to the point of like what it would be after 1960s LA or New York for a lot of those big cities. So China has done significant strides. You
Would you
know,
say they do more than they do more than what we do here in the U.S.?
I think so. I think lately they have. I think so. I think they've done quite a bit. Um, Compared to like others, they've done, of course, they're a big emitter, but I think they've done a lot of different things.
I think some of the issues people might have is like maybe painted an old image of China
I
and they
think
don't
so.
really look at what they're doing now.
I think so. China, like they've put in, I mean, China in 2020, they surpassed their target of 200 gigawatts of solar capacity. Think about
Hmm.
that. I mean, China has, reduced carbon significantly. They made progress, coal consumption has been, you know, they've restricted new coal-fired plants. They've, carbon pricing, they've done different kind of carbon trading schemes. I mean, they got EVs everywhere. They got international. They've done a lot of things that I don't think China gets enough credit. And China participates in the Paris Agreement. They participate in UNFCCC at the United Nations framework. It's the climate change through the UN. And the COP, which is the COP, if I don't know, Conference of Parties, which is where everyone meets on climate issues. So I think China's done very well. I don't think that China has done everything they can, but I would say overall that it's been better than what people give them credit for.
Mm.
Well, that's great. Yeah, thanks for catching me up. That reminds me of this book. It's called The Lies of the Land by Stephen Conn, Conn, and he talks a lot about the solutions that you just mentioned as possibilities for America. Because he basically, the best way I could put it is that the rapid urbanization and development subsidizes the rural areas that are underpopulated and underperforming. A lot of people think that it's big agro that's subsidizing the cities, but the math on that actually is inverse. So that could explain how China doesn't suffer from scale because it's massive country, so much land, and there's no way that they can conceivably populate it all in meaningful and productive ways without people suffering from lack of infrastructure, lack of care, right? So it sounds like packing in these cities and really making them into profit generators is what's keeping the country held together. So that's really interesting because in America, a lot of people are very anti-density in cities, especially wealthier folks. They don't want to feel crowded, you
Of
know?
course. They want them beachfront properties.
Mhm.
But I mean, also too, I think what's important for China is that by doing that, getting rid of people out of poverty, creates, and I think this is where the U.S. doesn't really understand it. It creates social stability, and also it'll literally legitimize your government. It would create legitimate government. And you have, that's something to think about. Also, too, you have to remember China's past. In 20th century, China, yeah, they got the memories of hardships, famines, social upheavals, world wars. They've had nothing. So China's built a country from nothing. They were decimated in World War II. They built a country from nothing, almost nothing. So they had a reason. They're like, well, we don't want to live like that. We all famine.
Basically, the
That,
country basically pulled itself together as
Yeah,
a team.
exactly.
is that culture, huh?
Yeah, you wouldn't see that in America. In China, social stability, so like social status and stability is so important, community important. So like here's an example, like if I go to the bar and I'm gonna buy a drink and someone buys me a drink and I say no, you have to save face, right? It's like that in the community too. So like if you go to the bar and you just I'm not gonna go hang out with you, I'm not gonna drink one. They may get upset at you because you kind of embarrass them right in front of everyone. But like they do it in a community sense as well. Like they don't want to be embarrassed of where they live.
Well, in America, we have class segregated spaces for sure. Like
That's
you,
true.
you need money to be there, right? Like you
Mhm.
can't be at the bar if you don't have any money to spend.
Exactly.
Um, so I mean, I guess we share that in that regard that like interclass contact is still an anxiety producer in both cultures, which I think is kind of fascinating. Like, okay, yeah, China eliminated poverty, but there's definitely different tiers of clubs and bars in China based on how much you're spending there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just like America.
I think another thing to consider too is the root causes of housing crisis in China and the US are kind of different. I feel like with China, it's been like rapid urbanization, where like a lot of the U.S. had like we had a mortgage crisis, even though they're still related, with like the main cause of like what happened in the recent time. Ours is like financial institutions, where like China is more like we're just building up urban towns immediately. So it's one of the differences. There's a whole lot of similarities too. I think the policy response from China and the US is also different. I think the government of China and regulated housing markets where the US didn't really do a lot, you know what I mean? Mortgage
This is
assistance and foreclosure moratorium basically, but they didn't, with China they went right on to lending practices at increased affordable housing. You didn't really see that in the US.
Hmm.
Government
yeah,
intervention
it's
was a big one too. I mean, China was promoting homes and controlling prices and affordability, and zoning out land the right way, property rights, where the U.S. was just making more market freedom and less direct government intervention. So China's government intervened, and the U.S. was like, "We'll let the market fix itself," but the market will never fix itself.
exactly like we talked about. The system that caused
Yeah,
the problems can't be the one that fixes it, right?
yeah,
So there's two in terms of reading more about housing and answering those questions and diving deeper into that. There's two books um, I think you should check out if you ever get a chance or whoever's listening. One is called "The City Authentic" by David Banks. Um, they talk about how American cities are taking the approach of like branding to fix their housing crisis, but it actually creates more gentrification. Okay, sorry, I got to wrap it up in a few minutes. I'm sorry. Thank you. I got to wrap it up in a few minutes here. But the other book is called "The Right to the City." The Right to the City by David Harvey. Um, man, that's it's really good read, and it talks about how essentially culture defines housing culture, like housing culture and the way it works. Yeah, it's predicated on this like operating system of economics, but there's this other layer, right? So the difference between the approach between China and America is that cultural layer. And I think that's like really worth exploring further, in terms of the fact that the housing crisis is a global crisis. And if something's working in China, maybe we should try it in America. Like, why not?
Yeah, exactly. I think the cultural differences, but then it's government differences too, like direct intervention versus trying to let the market do what it needs to do. But like I said a minute ago, and like you've been saying, will the market fix itself? Probably not. I mean, it just doesn't work like that. So you can't get affordable housing to work if you constantly allow the market to push the affordable housing rate to well above what you can afford.
Yeah, I
Like
guess
even
I
here in San
did.
Diego, you see that.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I did also lump in government under culture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the reason I do that is because if you if you look at January 6th in America,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can see where culture and government meet in a very hard and fast way.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But hey, this was really great. I learned so much. It was great. It was great meeting you and also catching up with you.
You're more than welcome to come back and we can have another discussion on housing.
I'd love to do that. I want to do some more research on China and dig into what they're doing right. I think we have a lot to learn. Yeah,
We
that would
should,
be
we should,
great.
I would love to do a podcast on that. When you're free, we should really just do a research, our 1 hour research podcast on that. Find out what we can find.
Oh, I'd love to do that. Yeah. So all right, y'all. I'm signing off, but have a good night. Thanks
Yep.
again.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you
We
for joining
appreciate you,
us.
Tony. All
All right,
right.
you
Have
too.
a
See
good
you.
one. Stay in
Bye.
touch. So, so Ethan, great show, great show.
Yes.
We have a lot to learn. I feel like I'll try to get him scheduled again.
Yeah, that
I
would
would
be
like a
great.
part two.
It was really fun trying to, gain perspectives on the whole housing situation within China and, comparisons with our own.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. I would like to see more, and definitely excited, and very excited for next week's episode. Or no, tomorrow's that was it? Yeah, we got one tomorrow. Tomorrow's episode, the next episode.
Oh,
Yeah, Saturday. Yeah, yeah. But that one will be. I'm not sure, but we'll cut that. We'll figure it out. We'll cut it at
yeah.
that point. So, all right. I think that worked out perfectly because that was directly at like 52 minutes.
Okay.
All right.